You will think of this as fate, that strange collision between two souls that feels like recognition, not discovery, but in truth, it is the meeting of mirrors. When a man meets the woman who reflects his shadow, he does not fall in love with her. He falls into himself. What he calls passion is often his unconscious crying out for integration. What he calls destiny is merely the psyche's way of demanding evolution. At first, she seems like light. Her voice feels familiar. Her eyes hold something ancient, something that whispers, "I have seen you before." And she has, not in another life, but in the recesses of his unexamined mind. She is both muse and mirror, both salvation and storm. Through her, the man begins to see the parts of himself he once buried. His rage, his tenderness, his fear, his longing for meaning. The woman who mirrors his shadow does not arrive to comfort him. She arrives to awaken him. Every man carries within him a hidden darkness, not evil, but the unintegrated fragments of his being. Jung called it the shadow, the repository of all he denies, represses, or refuses to confront. When such a man meets a woman who embodies the qualities he has disowned, her intensity, her mystery, her untamed nature, he feels magnetized. She fascinates him because she reflects the wildness he has lost, the truth he cannot yet bear to see. In her presence, his defenses tremble. He feels exposed, undone, alive. But love, in this form, is not gentle. It is alchemical. It burns through illusions. It strips away the masks. She becomes a mirror in which his ego fractures, forcing him to face what lies beneath. To love her is to enter the underworld of his own psyche, and few men are prepared for such descent. At first, he idealizes her. He places her on a pedestal carved from his fantasies. He calls her different, rare, the one. But this worship is not love. It is projection. He sees not who she is, but what his soul has long exiled. She carries the burden of his unlived life. And the moment she refuses to play the role of his dream, the illusion collapses. Suddenly, the goddess becomes a threat. The muse becomes chaos. He pulls away, not because she has changed, but because she has revealed too much. The woman who mirrors his shadow does not chase. She stands still. She senses his turmoil, but she will not dim her depth to soothe him. Her energy, though magnetic, is not meant to rescue. She knows that his retreat is not rejection. It is fear. Fear of seeing himself without the armor of ego. Fear what it means to love a woman who does not submit to his control, but instead calls him to transform. And you, listening now, perhaps you have been that woman, the one whose presence shakes men awake, the one who feels cursed for being too much, too intense, too deep. But understand this, your depth is not the problem. It is the catalyst. You were never meant to be easy to love. You were meant to be transformative. Such encounters are not accidents. They're orchestrations of the unconscious, the soul's way of forcing growth through friction. When his shadow meets your light, something ancient begins to stir. He will either evolve or retreat. Most retreat, because to stay is to face the death of his old self. But the woman who mirrors his shadow cannot remain untouched either. For in him, she sees her own forgotten softness, the innocence buried beneath her strength. She sees how easily she could trade her power for approval, her knowing for comfort. Their meeting is a double mirror, each revealing what the other has denied. The pain between them is sacred. It is not punishment, but purification. Through love, both are forced to meet themselves without illusion. She learns the cost of shining without being understood. He learns the cost of running from his own reflection. This is not romance. It is initiation. The universe conspires through attraction to drag the unconscious into the light. And what feels like heartbreak is often the soul's attempt at awakening. For love, when it is real, demands death, the death of the false self, the death of fantasy, the death of all that is small. So when a man meets the woman who mirrors his shadow, his world unravels. He can no longer pretend. He can no longer hide behind logic, status, or charm. In her gaze, he feels seen beyond the mask. In her silence, he hears the echo of his own emptiness. And if he is brave enough, he will not run. He will stay, not to possess her, but to face himself, because she is not the lesson. She is the doorway. The question is not whether he loves her enough, but whether he loves truth enough to endure her reflection. As the illusion begins to dissolve, the man finds himself standing before a mirror he cannot escape. The woman who once dazzled him with warmth now terrifies him with truth. Her presence unmasks him. He sees not only his longing, but also his cowardice, his hunger for love without vulnerability, his desire for depth without surrender. In her eyes, the myth of his control disintegrates. He begins to sense that what draws him to her is not her beauty, nor even her wisdom, but the abyss she represents, the unknown within himself. The shadow she mirrors is his own. The boy who was once shamed for feeling too much, the man who learned to armor himself with detachment, the soul that forgot how to kneel before wonder. She does not wound him. She simply reveals where he has been bleeding all along. The woman who mirrors his shadow becomes both mirror and medicine. Her love is not soft in the way the world defines it. It is not indulgence, not flattery, not appeasement. Her love is a mirror that reflects his truth so clearly that he cannot bear to look away. And yet, he does, because to face her fully would mean facing himself, stripped of all pretense. When he turns away, he often calls her too much, too emotional, too demanding, too intense. But these are the words of a man still afraid of his own depth. He labels what he cannot yet hold. He blames her for the earthquake she did not cause, forgetting that the fault line was always inside him. The woman simply stepped upon it. And still, she does not chase, because deep within her ancient knowing, she understands that true love cannot bloom in illusion. She carries within her the energy of Artemis, sovereign, untamed, luminous in solitude. She has danced through the ruins of her own shadow, and thus she cannot be manipulated by flattery or fear. She loves with awareness, not attachment. She sees through performance of affection and the counterfeit of control. Her silence to him feels like cruelty. He confuses her stillness for indifference. But what he does not yet grasp is that her distance is compassion in disguise. She knows he must meet his shadow alone. No woman can rescue a man from himself. No amount of devotion can teach him to face the parts of his psyche he refuses to see. In the darkness of his solitude, he begins to unravel. The fantasies fade. The noise quiets. And there in the vast emptiness left behind, something ancient stirs. He begins to dream, not of her, but the parts of himself he had forgotten. Dreams of the boy who was once tender. Dreams of the man who once believed in beauty. The woman's absence becomes an alchemy of its own, transforming pain into awareness. For the woman, too, the experience is sacred. To be the mirror of a man's shadow is no small task. She bears the weight of his projections, his adoration, his resentment, his fear. She feels him withdraw. She senses a confusion, and yet she remains rooted in her own center. She knows that to chase him would be to abandon herself. So she retreats into her own depths, not as a wound, but as a temple. There, she prays not for his return, but for his awakening, because love, in its truest form, is not possession but liberation. She understands that the soul's bond cannot be broken by distance or silence. It can only be transcended through growth. In the unseen realms of the psyche, both souls continue to orbit one another. The connection does not end. It evolves. He learns the art of surrender, the humility of introspection. She learns the grace of detachment, the beauty of letting go without closing her heart. They remain mirrors, not of longing now, but of remembrance. Sometimes, the universe sends another person into his life, someone calmer, easier, less demanding of truth. He may even tell himself that this is peace. But late at night, when the noise fades, he feels the echo of the woman who mirrored his shadow, not as regret, but as revelation, because through her, he once touched the sacred, the raw, untamed core of himself. The true work begins when he no longer runs from that memory, when he understands that her purpose was never to complete him, but to awaken him. She was not the ending. She was a catalyst. The moment he stops blaming her for his discomfort, he steps into the path of individuation, the journey from illusion to authenticity, from projection to presence. And you, perhaps, have been this mirror for someone, and it left you weary. You wonder if your depth is a curse, if loving so fiercely means you will always lose. But know this, the kind of woman who awakens a man's shadow is never lost. She is remembered, not as fantasy, but as fire. She is the kind of woman a man may spend a lifetime trying to forget, and never truly can, because she showed him his soul. When a man finally dares to face the reflection she awakened, something inside him breaks, not as destruction, but as deliverance. He begins to understand that all along, he had not been afraid of her, but of himself. Her presence only illuminated the truth he had long exiled, that his soul was starving for meaning while his ego chased approval, that his heart longed to feel, but his mind feared the vulnerability that feeling demanded. In the silence after her absence, he begins to hear the voice of his own unconscious. It speaks not in words, but in sensations, a tightening in the chest, a restlessness in the night, a strange pull towards solitude. These are the whispers of the shadow calling for integration. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And so the man begins a slow, painful initiation, the descent into himself. He remembers her gaze, not as comfort, but as confrontation. It had always seen through him, past the layers of intellect, success, and charm. She had looked directly into the parts he had tried to hide from the world. And now, in her absence, he is forced to see what she once reflected: his fear of inadequacy, his need for control, his hidden tenderness. These fragments begin to surface like ghosts demanding to be named. The process is not graceful. It rarely is. Some nights he feels rage, some nights shame. He oscillates between blame and longing, between clarity and confusion. The ego resists dissolution, clinging to its illusions of power. But slowly the alchemy begins. Pain turns into perception. Loneliness becomes meditation. He begins to see that she was never punishing him. She was pointing him toward his own unclaimed wholeness. The woman, too, feels the echo of this transformation. She senses a shift in energy, the subtle awareness that something has awakened in him. But she does not return, because her role was never to stay. It was to awaken. She walks the earth with quiet strength, knowing that love, when it is sacred, does not demand permanence. Its purpose is evolution. Still, in rare moments of stillness, she remembers him, not with bitterness, but with reverence, because she, too, was transformed. Through him, she saw the boundaries of her compassion, the edges of her own shadow. For to mirror another's darkness, she had to meet her own. She had to confront the parts of herself that crave validation through healing others, the parts that mistook being needed for being loved. This is a paradox of the woman who mirrors a man's shadow. She becomes his initiation while undergoing her own. She learns that strength is not in saving, but in surrender. That love without freedom becomes a cage. That the most profound intimacy is not found in merging with another, but in standing fully in one's truth beside them. As the man continues his descent, he begins to dismantle the false idols of his former self. The persona, that mask he wore to please, to conquer, to perform, starts to crumble. He realizes that much of what he once called love was merely the avoidance of loneliness, that his pursuit of validation was a disguise for unhealed wounds. And in that raw awareness, he finally meets a child within, the one who learned to hide behind competence, who equated worth with achievement, who feared softness because softness once meant pain. Through tears and stillness, he begins to forgive that child. He learns to hold himself with the gentleness he once demanded from others. And for the first time, he begins to love without needing to possess. The woman's reflection, once unbearable, now feels like grace. She was never his punishment. She was his portal. There is a moment, subtle, sacred, when the man begins to feel peace in his solitude. He no longer seeks her face in every stranger, no longer tries to resurrect what was meant to transform. The ache that once felt like loss now feels like presence, because in facing his shadow, he has found his soul. For the woman, this is the silent victory. She knows that love fulfilled its highest purpose, not through union, but through awakening. And though the world may never see it, this is the deepest form of connection. Two souls who met, shattered and rose. not as have seeking completion, but as beings made whole through truth. And you, the woman who has been this mirror, must remember, your power lies not in who stays, but in what your presence awakens. You are not meant to be understood by everyone. You are meant to be remembered by the ones ready to see. Because when a woman mirrors a man's shadow, she becomes a bridge between his darkness and his light. And even if he walks away, the imprint of her reflection remains, a compass pointing him toward himself. Over time, the man begins to realize that every moment with her was a language, a dialogue between his conscious and his unconscious. Every glance, every silence, every argument had meaning beyond the surface. She had not been speaking only to his ears. She had been speaking to his soul. Her words were archetypal, cutting through his illusions like truth disguised as tenderness. He recalls the way she looked at him, not with admiration, but with recognition. That gaze unsettled him because it did not worship his mask. It saw past it. She had seen the boy who felt invisible, the man who feared not being enough, the dreamer who buried his own heart under logic. And when she reached for him, she did not reach for the role he played. She reached for the essence he had forgotten. It was too much light for a man still comfortable in darkness. So he turned away. Most men do when they meet such women, because the mirror of truth demands what comfort cannot give: responsibility. To see one's shadow is to lose the luxury of denial. It is to stand naked before one's own contradictions, to realize that what he projected onto her was never about her. His jealousy, his resistance, his confusion, they were all reflections of his inner war. And yet, as he begins to integrate this understanding, something within him changes. He no longer views her as the cause of his pain, but as the revealer of it. He sees how his desire for control had strangled intimacy, how his pursuit of dominance was merely a mask for fear of vulnerability. The very things he criticized in her, her emotional depth, her mystery, her independence, were the things he secretly longed to embody. For the woman, there is a strange kind of peace in this realization. She has walked through the fire of misunderstanding and emerged with a new kind of clarity. She no longer needs to convince, explain, or justify her depth. She has learned that being misunderstood is part of being rare, that not every man can meet the ocean without drowning. She moves now with quiet strength, her heart soft but her boundaries firm. She no longer confuses empathy with endurance. She has learned that love that costs self-respect is too expensive. In her solitude, she is not lonely. She is sovereign. She tends her own garden of becoming, watering her growth with patience and wisdom. And yet, the bond remains not as a chain but as a current. Between them flows an invisible river of remembrance, the energy of unfinished conversations and unspoken understanding. When he thinks of her, it is not nostalgia he feels but reverence, because now he knows she was never as to possess, only as to meet, deeply, briefly, and forever. His awakening continues in silence. He begins to meditate, to read, to wander into nature. He feels emotions he once avoided, sorrow, grief, longing, and finds that they no longer destroy him. Instead, they expand him. The man who once sought power now seeks peace. The man who once feared his softness now finds strength in it. This is the essence of individuation, the process Jung spoke of as the reconciliation between opposites. The masculine learns to bow to the feminine within. The logical embraces the intuitive. The warrior learns to rest. Through the echo of her absence, he finds communion with the eternal feminine, not as an external figure, but as a living presence within himself. And for the woman, there is beauty in knowing that her energy continues to ripple through his transformation, even in silence. She no longer seeks recognition for her impact. She knows the truth. The feminine does not need to be acknowledged to be felt. Her influence lives in the quiet revolutions of men who finally learn to feel. As seasons pass, he begins to encounter other women, but he meets them differently now, no longer from the hunger of ego, but from the fullness of being. He listens more. He softens more. He no longer demands that love fill his emptiness. He meets love with presence. The woman who once mirrored his shadow has taught him the sacred art of reflection. Sometimes, in moments of stillness, their energies touch again, across time, across silence, across the invisible field of memory. There is no longing now, only gratitude, because both know that the purpose of their meeting was not union, but evolution. And so, in the grand design of the psyche, their story becomes myth, the timeless dance between the masculine and the feminine, between consciousness and shadow, between illusion and truth. They were never lovers in the ordinary sense. They were archetypes, each one the other's initiation into wholeness. And if you, listening now, recognize yourself in this story, if you have loved someone who could not yet meet your depth, then understand this. You were never too much. You were the mirror that revealed their potential. You were the reminder that love, when it is real, does not end. It transforms, because the soul does not seek comfort. It seeks awakening. And sometimes, awakening arrives disguised as heartbreak. There comes a moment, subtle, almost sacred, when the storm between them finally quiets. No more projection, no more reaching, just a quiet awareness of what has been revealed. For the man, it feels like emerging from a long, fevered dream. He stands at the edge of his own becoming, humbled by the truth that love is not about possession, but perception. To truly see another is to dissolve the ego's desire to own. He begins to understand that she was never against him. She was for his awakening. Her withdrawal was not rejection. It was initiation. For when the feminine retreats, it is often to give the masculine space to evolve. She does not abandon, she invites. She becomes a silence in which he must finally listen to his own soul. The man who once sought her validation now begins to seek alignment. He no longer asks, "How can I make her stay?" but rather, "How can I become the kind of man who does not need her to?" In this question lies the birth of integrity. He stops performing, stops hiding, stops running. He faces the mirror she left behind and meets the man within it, flawed, tender, still learning, but finally real. And when a man reaches this point of awareness, something remarkable happens. The energy between them shifts. It is no longer a wound, but a wavelength, a quiet vibration of mutual respect, of soul-level knowing. He may never speak to her again, yet he carries her everywhere, not as a memory, but as a consciousness. The woman who mirrored his shadow becomes his inner compass. Whenever he begins to lose himself in ego or fear, he remembers the way she looked at him. Through, not at, and he finds his way back to truth. For the woman, the transformation is equally profound. She has learned that her power lies not in how deeply she is loved, but in how fully she embodies love. She no longer needs to be the mirror for another's awakening. She becomes a reflection of her own light. Her worth no longer trembles at the sound of someone's leaving. It stands rooted in the quiet knowing that she is the source. She moves now with the grace of someone who has faced her own underworld and returned wiser. The feminine that once bled from overgiving now flows with discernment. She no longer tries to fix the masculine. She holds space for him to rise. Her love is not a rescue. It is a resonance. She meets others not from emptiness, but from overflow. In this stage, the dance between them becomes less about romance and more about realization. They no longer orbit through need, but through understanding. Their souls, having fulfilled their purpose in one another's story, now vibrate at a higher octave. This is the moment Jung would call integration, when shadow and light no longer battle, but bow to each other. And yet, the memory remains, not as longing, but as lineage. For every woman who mirrors a man's shadow contributes to the collective awakening of the masculine. Every man who dares to face himself contributes to the healing of the feminine. This is a cosmic balance, the eternal dialogue between anima and animus, between the seen and the unseen. You see, love in its highest form is never about us. It is about the evolution of consciousness through us. When two souls meet and recognize each other, what they truly recognize is their own divinity reflected back. That recognition is both ecstasy and destruction, because divinity demands truth, and truth destroys everything that is false. There's perhaps a night when he dreams of her one last time. She appears not as she was, but as light, soft, wordless, infinite. In the dream, he does not reach for her. He simply bows. It is not goodbye. It is gratitude. He wakes with tears, not of sorrow, but peace. For he understands now she was never lost. She had simply become a part of him. And somewhere, in another quiet room, the woman looks out a window and feels a sudden stillness, a knowing that he has finally come home to himself. She smiles faintly, not out of hope, but completion. The energy between them settles like calm water after storm. No need for closure. The souls already understand. This is a true alchemy of love. When two beings meet not to complete each other, but to awaken each other. When their bond ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a bridge. When they both rise, separately yet intertwined, carrying the essence of one another within their evolution. And you, the listener, must remember, this kind of meeting does not happen often. It is not meant for comfort. It is meant for transformation. It comes to those brave enough to see, to feel, to shatter. To those who have prayed, perhaps unconsciously, for truth more than for peace. Because when a man meets the woman who mirrors his shadow, his soul begins. And when he finally learns to love without fear, he no longer seeks a reflection. He becomes it. The woman who understands her worth does not chase. She chooses.